And I know we have doctors from the Harford County Medical Association and representatives from the Fairfield County Medical Association. Thank you all for being here this morning. The reason why I asked all of these leaders on healthcare policy to be here, and I'm glad to see we have bipartisan representation from the legislature, is because this is an effort by all of us in the name of the state of Connecticut to protect and defend Connecticut families from an industry-wide scheme to fix the price of generic drugs. I think one of the critical policy questions all of us ask ourselves every day is, why is healthcare so expensive? And why is the price of prescription drugs so expensive? And this case answers part of that question in a big way, because on a widespread basis among the largest manufacturers and large segments of the market, prices are fixed and the market is rigged. And we have emails, text messages, phone records, in-person meetings, cooperating witnesses that demonstrate conclusively and without a doubt that the major drug manufacturers, including the largest generic drug manufacturer in the world, Teva, are openly and brazenly colluding on price, and they're dividing up market share. And this affects all of us every day. We're not talking about boutique, marginal drugs. We're talking about drugs that every one of us takes. So last night, America got a little too much information about me. I have a little rosacea. And so I take doxycycline, which a lot of people take every day. And I take one pill every day of doxycycline. 60 Minutes reported that over a 1 or 2 year period, I think, doxycycline shot up 8,000%. This is a common dermatologic drug. The other one that really shocks me is we were having a meeting, and the name of a generic name of a drug, azithromycin, was mentioned. And I was like, I've heard that word, azithromycin. And so I stewed for like 2 minutes and tried to remember what azithromycin is. And I turned to Joe and I said, what's azithromycin? And he said, Z-Paks. How many of us in this room have either taken a Z-Pak or have stood in line at your local pharmacy, as I have over and over again, waiting for your Z-Pak for your kids, right? This is common, everyday stuff, as common as, frankly, aspirin, or painkillers. These are the drugs that all of us in Connecticut take to live. And that's why the effort by this group and this lawsuit is so profound in its reach and foundational to trying to reduce the cost of American health care for all of Connecticut's families. Let me just talk about the misconduct here. What we have found is that the generic drug manufacturers, by and large, most of the majors, represent the largest corporate cartel in American history. And I think what we're seeing is one of the most far-reaching conspiracies to collude on price and to divide up market share. They call it market allocation, that many of us have ever seen. Under the antitrust laws, this is known as conduct that is illegal per se, which means all we have to do is prove by a preponderance of the evidence, more than 50%, it's more likely true than not. Okay, all we have to prove is that they did this and they're liable. And in the normal course, cases like this, antitrust cases, it's a lot of circumstantial evidence, for lack of a better description. You infer from the evidence what's happening because you observe what happens in the marketplace. You don't often have direct evidence of wrongdoing. And what we have are emails, text messages, competitors talking back and forth with each other. And by the way, if you work at a major American company and a highly competitive one, walking in the door that colluding on price and market share is highly illegal. and that when you talk to your competitors, you got to be really careful, because you're already on thin ice. If you're at Teva and you pick up the phone and you call Mylan or Sandoz, you're already in a tough spot. You're already on thin ice. And so to go a step further and to talk in emails and text messages about price and about following each other on price and about sharing information and market share and playing nice in the sandbox and making sure that everybody gets their fair share, playing nice in the sandbox, meaning let's not undercut each other, right? Let's make sure everybody wins, and let's drive these prices up together. That is highly, highly illegal on its face. And that's what's so not just disappointing, but dramatically wrong about what we're seeing here. It's that people do this every day at these companies, and it seems like it's part of a routine. It's part of what they do. And I picture in my mind's eye, national account executives or marketing representatives of these companies, in the Mid-Atlantic corridor, which is where many of these companies are, and they just go in the morning and they break the law. And then they have lunch. In the afternoon, they break the law again. And they go home, they have dinner, they come in the next day, and they do it again. And what we're seeing is that this routine repeats itself mostly in the phone records. And this is what really cracked the case. What Joe and Mike and the team figured out is that they could use sophisticated law enforcement software to chop up and break down phone records. And what you see is that on days right before, right after, right around when there's a major price spike in a generic drug, the chatter among competitors reaches a almost frenetic, frantic pace where you have calls at 1-minute call, 2-minute call, 45-minute calls at times among competitors. There's just no reason for competitors to be talking to each other with that level of frequency, particularly around the time when price is about to go up, or price does go up. And so that's the kind of hard evidence that shows that the major drug manufacturers, the major generic drug manufacturers in this country are committing a massive fraud on Connecticut and the American people, and we are going to claw back as much as we can of the billions of dollars that they stole from all of us. So let me turn it over to Mike, our department head, who has a few words, and then we're happy to open it up for questions.
Thank you, Attorney General Tong. I just want to thank you and your staff, and I want to thank former Attorney General Jepsen for your support and the commitment that you've provided my staff to let us do what we do best. Really, I just want to be brief, and I want to thank my team. Joe Nielsen, who you saw last night on 60 Minutes, he's worked on this case since July of 2014, and for the first 2 years, he worked on it by himself. He's sacrificed a lot to get this case where it is today. He missed vacations. He had vacations cut short. He works 24/7. I think he even had to reschedule the renewal of his marriage vows for this case. And to make it perfectly clear, no question, if it wasn't for the work that he did, we would not be standing in this room today talking about this case. Laura Martella, we recruited her specifically to be Joe's wingwoman, and we couldn't have made a more inspired choice. She's dedicated, she's committed to this case, and she gives it 110%, and you're going to hear a lot more about her on this case in the coming years. I want to thank Tony Conti, Rachel Davis, Christine Miller for their support, for the commitment that they put on this case. Lynn Strobel, our administrative assistant, is up there, who works until 10 o'clock, midnight if necessary, in order to put these cases out. And last but not least, I want to thank our paralegal extraordinaire, Gail Colarisi, who basically makes the trains run on time in this department, in our department. She does all the background work that nobody sees, that allows the staff to do what they do and we do best. So we'll we'll pat ourselves on the back real quick, we'll take a deep breath, and then we're going to continue pushing forward so that we can finish what we started and get restitution and recovery for all the victims out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me also, I was warned about this, but if we could just part the seas for a second here. This poster really gives you stand on this side, a very good sense of the scale and the scope of this conspiracy. And what you see here, it's the major companies, right? It's the major companies not just in this country, but in the world. And then you have 16 individual defendants in this complaint? 15. And what our evidence shows is that these individuals and these companies and these individuals acting on behalf of these companies are talking to each other. All of those pieces of yarn there connecting all these companies to each other at a very high rate of contact. And again, contact that is unnatural, unusual for competitors, and highly illegal around market movements and price increases. So I hope that helps everybody understand the full scope of what's happening. And with that, happy to take questions.
So those phone conversations, you don't have the content of those conversations. You
No.
have the quantity. Is that right?
Well, we have records as to when the phone calls happened, how long they lasted, between whom we have 600-something people in our database whose phone records we have. Right. We have emails and text messages that occur at or around the same time that sometimes reflect or record what happened in those telephone conversations.
And then
content? We have cooperating witnesses.
They have content?
Yeah.
The emails have
Sure.
content. The phone conversations do not.
Can you
Right.
explain the difference between this case that was filed recently and the case that was filed in the multi-district court in Pennsylvania?
This is 10 times bigger. And the first complaint focused on a company called Heritage, and frankly, it was the team and Joe's work on Heritage that helped break it open as to all the other companies. This complaint focuses a lot on Teva, which is the largest generic drug manufacturer in the world. And it really shows the scale and the scope of the collusion and this conspiracy and how it touches so many of the key actors. So it's another, I guess, evolution from the first complaint, and we're not done. This is part of a phased approach, and we're looking at every major player in the industry.
What does the end result look like? Should executives go to prison, or is it a way to get money back for people through some kind of a program?
So there are investigations going on by both civil and criminal authorities. The Department of Justice is engaged. As you know, our office doesn't really have criminal jurisdiction, so I'll leave that to the prosecutors and criminal authorities. That being said, this conduct is highly illegal, much of it punishable by criminal sanctions. What we're focused on, as I said, is the billions of dollars in losses to people of this state and across the country, in money that we should have never paid for generic drugs that we rely on every day.
And when you reached out to other attorneys general and offices about this case, what was the reaction?
They're hot about it. They're excited about the case because many of them have seen the evidence, but they're angry about the scope and the depth of this conspiracy. Let me say that when I first got to the Attorney General's office, we had a briefing amongst our senior staff. Joe did a PowerPoint that went for about an hour, focused mostly on the Heritage complaint, which has now been unsealed and is unredacted. The Teva complaint, for lack of a better description, is still in its redacted form. It was just filed Friday. But Joe gave us an hour-long presentation, and one of our most senior lawyers, Eric Lohr, who's an associate attorney general, he sits right over there, he's not actively involved in this case, but as Joe was going through the evidence and the text messages and the emails, I could tell Eric was getting more and more frustrated and fidgety. And finally, he just blurted out and pointed at the screen, but that's illegal. And yes, it's illegal. And that's how brazen and, as I said this morning, undertaken without shame. You know, this is just what they did.
The complexity of this could take 5 years to achieve.
Sure.
Or longer. You're talking about recompense for, what do we have to do? Keep all of our receipts in the drugstore so that you can, or is it all going to, like the tobacco settlement, just go to the state and then the General Assembly will decide whether?
Well, that's why our partners are here, because frankly, we're going to learn a lot in this case and have learned a lot, and there may be both litigation and legislative solutions to what we do. That's why when we take an action like this in the name of the state of Connecticut, it's an effort that all of us engage in, and that's why it takes 44 states and counting, and, you know, to do all of this heavy lifting. It's going to take time, but it could not be more important. As I said, this isn't a boutique question about some marginal drugs for marginal elements. These are drugs that all of us take every day to live.
And Pfizer's in the middle of it?
Pfizer's in the middle of it in its own name as a defendant, but also acting through its subsidiary Greenstone.
Teva took the lead on this conspiracy. Is this a template for the investigation and for subsequent litigation, in the sense that are there other companies that took the lead in fixing prices for generics in which they had the bulk of the market share?
Yeah, so let me back up and say the reason why we're doing it this way is because when we sued Heritage and the other companies, including Teva and Mylan and all the big players, those allegations focused on Heritage and the way in which Heritage led its portion of this conspiracy and the others helped. Right? This complaint is about Teva largely and the way that Teva led its part of the conspiracy and the others helped. And we're going to keep going. And we're going to be talking about other companies and other ways in which other market players led this conspiracy.
You have reason to believe at this point that there are other players that have played similar roles?
Yes.
Joe Nielsen, could you step to the microphone for a minute and just tell us if there was some point during this 5-year journey you've been on that there was an aha moment?
There were a few, but yeah, the first time we got a large set of text messages from one of the companies where we could really see them communicating with each other, it was the first aha moment, I think, at that point, where we said we've got them now, and we are starting to understand exactly how they're engaging in the conduct.
And how long ago was that when you first got that?
That was probably in 2016.
It was.
I would say.
Joe, how could they have been so stupid?
Most of them are very sophisticated about this and have kept it out of writing. There are many senior executives at these companies who have instructed their employees to keep this information out of writing. We happened to catch a few of them who were not as good at that, but and that has allowed us to better understand how this was all working and use the phone records to develop more of that evidence and see the patterns on how it happened. But most of them have not been that stupid, frankly, and they've kept most of it out of writing.
But I think, Josh, you ask a good question, which sort of suggests that this was accidental or a mistake or haphazard. And I think the answer is no, it wasn't, right? It wasn't accidental or haphazard or a mistake. This is what many of these defendants and corporate executives in these companies do every day as part of their, right, from the top down, as part of their business. And there are defendants here, one of whom is named Nisha Patel, who's a named defendant. These are people, Nisha has deep relationships throughout the entire industry, and she was hired by Teva for her relationships. These are the people, because of their experience and their relationships and their knowledge, who are most trained and most able to collude. And so I think we have to be clear about what they're doing. It's not like on one day they just decided, oh, I'm just going to take a detour and I'm going to call Joe and I'll just do it a little bit and collude. This is part of a systemic problem in the industry where this is the job of many of these executives, which is to find ways to push prices up and keep them there.
How long do you think this dates back based on the investigation, as far as the phone conversations and collusion?
Well, our investigation goes back to 2013. We started in 2013.
We started in July of 2014, but the facts that we have uncovered show that it goes well back into the early 2000s at least. This is the kind of thing that developed over time, and the more these companies got comfortable communicating and fixing prices and allocating markets, they began to do it more and more. So we have evidence showing as early as 2000, we alleged in our initial complaint 2006, we have uncovered evidence that it goes back even further than that.
The millions of phone records and emails, does that carry you through Heritage and then it continues to bolster the new case?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And remember the basics about this industry. Generic drugs were supposed to drive down the price of drugs, right? Once patent protection is lifted on a particular drug, what Congress designed was a marketplace where generic manufacturers would jump in, right? And there's no difference between drugs at the generic stage, right? The generic stage, it's a commodity. They all have the same chemical composition. They're the same drugs. And so there's nothing about a generic drug, unlike a branded drug that has some special sauce in it that makes it different. And so if three companies jump in with the exact same thing, there's only one thing to compete on: price, right? And they should have jumped in, competed on price, and helped drive the price down. That didn't happen. In fact, prices went up. And there's a persistent question, well, is this still going on? Well, we haven't really seen prices come down in any major way, okay? And you would expect that once we've identified the collusion and the misconduct, that they would stop colluding and they would start undercutting each other in price, and then prices would drop precipitously. That hasn't happened either.
There are also all sorts of excuses they can make, or reasons, I should say, not excuses, reasons they can make for that. For example, the hurricane that hit Puerto Rico. There's a number of large drug-making firms there that had no power for months. I don't even know if they're operating now. They could say, well, that's one of the reasons why the price of XYZ drugs went up, because we couldn't make it in our main plant at San Juan.
Momentary shocks to supply, we understand, and momentary constraints in a particular market, yes, that's observable, because it should be time limited, right? There should be a period in which that happens, and it's linked to a particular event. There's no reason why a basic run-of-the-mill dermatologic drug should go up 8,000%. That has nothing to do with a hurricane anywhere.
And what happens to the brand name drugs while these generics are rising? Do the brands follow upward, or is it a different track?
The brands are usually priced much higher to begin with. So when a generic enters the market, they don't price higher than the brand, they price lower.
Right.
And competition usually drives prices down. So when these companies are deciding not to compete any longer, they're fixing prices and raising them. They're not raising them above the brand price. They're still below the brand, but there was...
Approaching.
Yes, approaching. So the brand doesn't have to go up. The brand is still the higher price.
And how many drugs are we talking about that, as far as this case is involved?
I think we identify 114 different generic drugs in this complaint. There were 15 identified in the last complaint, and there's a number that are still subject to the ongoing investigation.
Does DOJ have everything you have, or how does that work?
I don't think we really want to comment on what the DOJ is doing. To the extent that we do have any information about that, they're subject to grand jury secrecy laws, and we know that they do have a lot of the information because we're working with some of the same cooperating witnesses and individuals, and they've received a lot of the same documents we have.
But they work with your office, though. They'll work with your office. I mean, there's...
Yeah, to the extent that we have the ability to coordinate with the antitrust division of the DOJ, we do it, but they have a separate investigation.
General, the Trump administration has made it clear that they want to try to drive down the price of drugs. Have you heard from them since Friday?
I have not, personally. This is an extraordinary situation in which the states, and in particular a relatively small New England state, Connecticut, are leading the way. It doesn't always work this way, but in this case, we're driving the bus, which is, when before I became Attorney General, when I became Attorney General, George Jepsen would tell me that we have an incredible office, which I knew. But then when I met my peers from across the country at various meetings of Attorneys General, they say, you have the best office in the country. And that's very flattering, and you think they're just trying to be nice, right, to a new colleague. But as I've come to learn, it's true. We punch way above our weight, and this is evidence of that, where a relatively small state, at these big AG conferences, New York, California, Texas, Florida, they get a lot of attention because they have the muscle. They have thousands of lawyers, in their offices of attorneys general, and they lead the way on a lot of big initiatives. That Connecticut and this group of very capable lawyers and professionals are leading the way on a case of such importance to our everyday lives across the country is extraordinary.
Attorney General, can you clarify? Your investigators have seen these emails
Yes.
and these text messages that can prove that is it Teva? Teva is working with competitors?
Yes, Teva and others, all the defendants.
From time to time, when they're budgeting across the street, they include a line about what they expect in the way of settlement that this office will bring in. Obviously, it's far too early in this case. But is there anything over the horizon that is you are so comfortable about that it's going to be an item in the budget?
No, certainly not at this point. I can say this. We're focused on trial, as we are on the opioid investigation, too. People are asking about that and what we can expect. I think the exposure for these companies and these defendants, both in this case and in the opioid case, is in the billions of dollars, starting with a B. And I think that the damage that they have done is profound. I don't have any sense that it's going to be resolved anytime soon from a budget perspective.
Well, I mean, not this case, but Purdue Pharma obviously has reached at least one settlement with the state. Can you comment on how soon we might see other settlements from them, including in
We're focused on trial in that case, too.
Okay.
Until this case was filed down the street at this courthouse, what are the prospects of this being tried in Hartford, or do you think it will be tried?
I think we look forward to trial, and we look forward to trial here in Hartford.
You don't think?
And I think this team is ready to go.
You don't think these companies will try to get it moved to someplace where they think it might be friendlier?
They can try, but Connecticut's leading the way on this. The damage to this state and the people in this state is real, and there's no good reason to move it.
Well, when you join with other states like this, I know I've probably asked Blumenthal and the others about how this works, but I don't remember. What happens? Do they offer you just some kind of help, some kind of, what goes on there?
Each case is different, and so on this case, I'm proud to say that we're doing a lot of that work in-house, and that other states have contributed resources and people, and they're a big part of it. But I think they appreciate that we're taking the lead on this case, and in other cases it's different. In other cases, other states will take the lead. And
the tobacco case was shipped out to an outside law firm, as I recall. Were any of you here then?
I think, yeah.
This one's not, though. This is what we're doing ourselves. And to answer your other question, the first case was removed to the Eastern District of Pennsylvania.
Right.
This one transferred. This one will probably be transferred to Eastern District of Pennsylvania as well for discovery purposes.
It will.
But then it'll be transferred back to Connecticut for trial.
And the part of the reason is that there's a multi-district litigation panel in Pennsylvania, because there's a lot of other cases that have come out of this investigation by private parties, and so that's all being coordinated in Pennsylvania. Again, by way of analogy, the opioid MDL is in Cleveland, Ohio, and so for administrative purposes and discovery purposes, those are happening in the MDLs, but we fully expect it to come home to federal court here in Connecticut.
But I said 5 years. I was just guessing. Is that? Do you think it'll take that long? This case?
To get back to Connecticut for
No,
trial?
the whole thing.
There are more phases to go. It's a pretty complex litigation. I don't know if I want to put a timetable, but
It could take a decade, couldn't it?
longer than,
Yeah.
sure, for sure.
Is this case significantly different than the previous one that will remain separate, or is there any chance they'll be combined?
It's different, as I said earlier, in its focus and in some of the counts, and again, it's 10 times bigger, and the reach is much more significant. In terms of consolidation, I don't think so, I don't think so.
No, it will not be consolidated with the heritage complaint. And if anything, if we try these cases, they will be segregated, and we'll try parts of them at a time, if anything.
Knowing all of the hours that have been poured into this investigation and the money that you have spent to take medication daily, you have to have an opinion on the consequences that you hope, if held liable, the companies and those players will face.
I think these companies owe the American people billions of dollars in damages, and this misconduct has to stop, and we're going to stop them.
Hello, Attorney General. I'm Bo Subarao, President-elect of Connecticut State Medical Society. There are so many accomplices. Well, first, let me actually congratulate you and thank you for doing this. This has been my dream. I think this is an open secret. Public knew this and have been suffering this for a long time. At this point, there are so many other accomplices that PBMs, where the pharmacy benefit managers and the group purchasing plans who collude with them, what is their...
So our investigation necessarily has to look at the entire industry and every actor in the industry. By way of analogy, again, when I talk about the opioid crisis, it's not just the major manufacturers, it's an addiction industry that makes money off of people's misery in the opioid context. Here, yeah, we have to take a wide view, and we're taking a wide view. This is what we're prepared to do today as of Friday in this case, which is to focus on Teva and its co-defendants and the 15 individuals. And we'll see where our investigation takes us. This investigation is ongoing and expanding. And in terms of time, yes, Mark, it's going to take time because it's just that big.
How many of the 15 individuals reside in Connecticut?
Zero.
None of them.
As a physician, I'd like to say that I find that it's absolutely impossible to prescribe today. Between all the alerts we get on EMRs and all the drug interactions, the kidney failure, and then we come across these types of problems where somebody has a hemorrhoid and it's $150 to put a 40 to 50-year-old medication in an area that needs treating is crazy.
Yeah.
So we really need to move on.
And again, that underscores this is everyday. These are everyday conditions and everyday drugs. And they shouldn't cost what they cost. And you shouldn't be in that position of prescribing medication where people have to choose between things they need in life, like rent and food, and taking care of their children, and the prescription drugs they need.
And doxycycline came out in like 1960.
Yeah.
Well, Zithromax, too. That's been out a long time, right? Zithromax, that's been out a long time.
Yeah, but doxycycline's been out much longer.